Have you ever had the thought, I'm just not talented? When this idea pops into your head, what usually triggers it? Maybe it's struggling with math, not being good at basketball, or feeling like you're not cut out for a particular career. It often seems like talent is the only answer to that nagging question. Why aren't my efforts paying off? To answer this question, let's start with a little experiment. I need your full attention now. I'm going to read out a string of numbers, and your task is to memorize them. Ready? Here we go. 7, 9, 2, 6, 4, 9, 8. Now, you can write down what you remember in the comments. So, how many numbers were you able to memorize? Honestly, the exact number doesn't matter. Most people can remember about 7 digits. But here's the interesting part. The author of the book we're discussing today conducted an experiment and helped an ordinary person with memory skills just like ours eventually memorize 82 digits. How did this person achieve such a feat? Think of this video as one that could turn you into a genius. By the time you finish watching, I promise you'll have a whole new perspective on effort and talent. Take Mozart, for example. He's universally seen as a prodigy. Throughout his life, he composed over 800 works and started performing in Munich at the age of 6. He had an extraordinary ability known as perfect pitch, the skill to identify the exact pitch of a sound just by hearing it. This ability is extremely rare, with only about 1 in 10,000 people possessing it. To the average person, it seems like pure talent, something we could never compete with. But is that really the case? The author's research suggests otherwise. Studies found that perfect pitch is actually more common among speakers of tonal languages, such as Mandarin or Vietnamese. Tonal languages use pitch variations to distinguish meaning, so the author hypothesized, could it be that children exposed to tonal languages from a young age are more likely to develop perfect pitch? Testing this was straightforward. Researchers studied people of Asian descent who didn't speak tonal languages, like Asian Americans, and found that their likelihood of having perfect pitch was similar to the general population. This suggests that children who grow up practicing tonal languages are indeed more likely to unlock this skill. If you're still not convinced, let's look at another experiment conducted by a Japanese psychologist. In 2014, Ayako Sakakibara recruited 24 children aged 2 to 6 and trained them for several months to identify piano chords, essentially teaching them perfect pitch. Remarkably, within less than a year, all 24 children had developed perfect pitch. That's right, this supposedly rare skill was cultivated in every single one of them. This demonstrates that perfect pitch isn't an innate gift limited to a lucky few. It's a potential skill that nearly anyone can develop through proper training. So, what about Mozart? First of all, his father was a professional pianist. However, having failed to achieve the success he desired, Mozart's father placed all his hopes on his children. By the age of 11, Mozart's sister was already recognized by her contemporaries as a professional musician, considered a prodigy in her own right. But Mozart surpassed even her talents. Drawing from the experience gained in training his sister, their father devoted himself entirely to teaching Mozart music. When you look at it this way, Mozart's perfect pitch and extraordinary achievements seem less like a miraculous exception and more like a predictable result of intense training and dedication. This shows us that so-called genius is often the result of training. But this raises another question. If that's true, why do people in the same classroom or company, putting in similar levels of effort, achieve vastly different results? The author believes the answer lies in the way we practice. First, the author argues that we should not blindly believe in the 10,000-hour rule. Many of you have probably heard of this theory, which originates from the book Outliers. The theory states that people who excel in their fields typically have over 10,000 hours of practice. For example, the Beatles had already practiced for about 10,000 hours before their performances in Hamburg in the 1960s, and Bill Gates spent roughly the same amount of time programming. Based on these observations, the author of Outliers concluded that becoming an expert in any field requires around 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. However, the author of our book believes that the 1,000 hour rule is not entirely accurate. First, because 10,000 hours is an average derived from studying multiple industries, it may not apply equally across all fields. In complex fields like medicine, it might take 10 or 20 years to achieve notable success, whereas other industries might allow someone to start working after just 3 weeks of training. Second, the way people practice and the effort they put in vary significantly. I once saw a friend of mine who codes with such focus that he blocks out all distractions, sometimes even failing to hear me when I ask him questions. On the other hand, during my college days, I had another friend studying computer science who loved listening to music, snacking, and coding all at the same time. When I checked his work, I saw he had written a program with 9 nested for loops, purely crap code. For those of you familiar with programming, feel free to explain crap code in the comments. So, even with the same 10,000 hours of practice, the results these two people achieved were drastically different. Third, success is also influenced by external factors like social background, opportunities, and luck. This means that practice time alone isn't enough. Believing that ability improves solely with more hours of practice can lead to 2 common errors in thinking. The first error is doubting your talent. For instance, if you spend some time learning math or trying sales, but see no progress, you might start questioning whether you're just not cut out for STEM subjects or interacting with people. The second error is putting in more meaningless effort. Imagine using a bent water hose to water your plants. Since the water flow is weak, instead of fixing the bend, you increase the water pressure. The result? The hose eventually bursts from the excessive strain. Similarly, without the right methods, simply increasing effort won't lead to better outcomes. Instead, you need a scientific approach to maximize your effort effectively. So, what is the right method? The author refers to it as deliberate practice. Let's dive into what that means. The author conducted an experiment where they recruited a volunteer and tasked him with memorizing as many random numbers as possible in one go. At the start, this person was, like any of us, able to recall only 7 to 8 digits at a time. But after 2 years of targeted training, this volunteer could recite 82 digits in one go. Let that sink in. After hearing a computer read out 82 digits, he could recite them all from memory. To most people, that seems like pure genius. But this example isn't extreme. Humanity has repeatedly demonstrated collective breakthroughs in potential throughout history. For instance, in 1908, athlete Johnny Hayes won the Olympic marathon with the time of 2 hours, 55 minutes, and 18 seconds. At the time, newspapers called it the greatest race of the 20th century. Yet today, the world record for the marathon has been reduced to 2 hours, 1 minute, and 9 seconds, nearly an hour faster than Hayes' time. In fact, if you're a man aged 18 to 34 hoping to qualify for the Boston Marathon, you need a time of at least 3 hours and 5 minutes. That means Hayes' once record-breaking time would barely qualify for entry today. Similarly, at the 1908 Olympics, a diver attempting a double somersault narrowly avoided serious injury. Officials even considered banning the move, deeming it too dangerous for future competitions. Yet today, the double somersault is an entry-level skill for diving. Even teenagers learning to dive can master it with ease. All of this is because, as many industries evolve, people spend more time training, develop more advanced and scientific practice methods, and operate within increasingly standardized systems. This allows later generations to stand on the shoulders of giants, continuously engaging in deliberate practice and breaking previous records. It's clear that only with scientific methods of practice can we consistently achieve breakthroughs. Given the wealth of experience accumulated by those who came before us, we should, in theory, learn from and apply it effectively. But is this really what we do in our day-to-day practice? Let's take a look at one of the most common approaches to practice: ineffective practice. Imagine you've just started learning basketball and know absolutely nothing about it. At this stage, you need to learn the rules of the game, how to dribble, pass, and catch the ball, and so on. Initially, Everything feels new and challenging, so you practice diligently. After some time, you realize you've become reasonably good at the game. You can play with ease, even chatting with your friends while playing, and it doesn't feel as strenuous as it once did. However, you notice a problem. Your passing is inaccurate. Your opponents also seem to pick up on this weakness, often targeting you and forcing you into bad passes that lead to turnovers. While these mistakes cost your team points, they don't happen all the time, so you brush them off and continue playing as you always have. This example mirrors how many people approach learning a new skill. In the early stages, when everything is unfamiliar, there's a lot to learn and progress comes quickly. But once you've mastered the basics, the simple and fundamental skills are essentially in place. At this point, many people shift into an automatic mode, comfortably handling their tasks without much effort. Unfortunately, this is where most people plateau. From then on, they merely repeat what they already know, mechanically going through the motions without further improvement. In fact, staying in this comfort zone for too long can even lead to a decline in ability. The author cites a study in the book that highlights this phenomenon. It was found that some doctors with 30 to 40 years of experience scored worse on objective performance metrics than doctors who had only been practicing for 2 or 3 years. The reason lies in this very tendency. Once someone's performance reaches an acceptable level and becomes automatic, additional years of practice don't lead to further improvement. We see examples of this everywhere in real life. A teacher with decades of experience might not be as effective as a newly trained one. Someone who has been cooking at home for 10 years might not show much improvement, while a new Oriental cooking trainee might secure a high-paying job after just 3 years. So, why do people stop progressing once they reach a certain level? The author believes there are 2 main reasons. The first is the refinement of problems. Using the basketball example again, when you're just starting out, the issues you face are broad and fundamental. You're essentially bad at everything. At this stage, any effort you put into learning is likely to pay off. But as you continue to practice, you address all the basic problems, leaving only more specific and nuanced issues. For instance, you might need to focus on practicing reverse passes, learning how to handle spinning balls, or fine-tuning your posture. These problems become so specific that they're not easily noticeable. Without deliberate effort to identify and address them, you're unlikely to make progress. We've discussed in our video on the neuroscience of exams how human memory tends to be fuzzy, and learning is essentially a process of strengthening associations and eliminating ambiguity. Solving these refined problems is a crucial part of that process. However, this refinement of problems is also why many people's skills stagnate. The second reason is human nature's tendency toward low energy consumption. As we've mentioned before, in prehistoric times, humans needed to conserve as much energy as possible to survive. The brain, being the most energy-intensive organ, naturally seeks to minimize effort. Once you've reached a beginner level in a skill, solving finer problems becomes increasingly difficult. Since your current level is already good enough, it's easy to avoid deliberate practice and save energy. These 2 factors, refusing to address refined problems and avoiding high-effort practice, are why people often get stuck. This approach, where people avoid difficult and energy-intensive practice, is called ineffective practice. To break free, deliberate practice must first ensure that practice is effective. Let's discuss the essential requirements for effective practice. The first requirement is to have a well-defined and specific goal. Let's revisit the basketball example. Saying, "I want to improve my basketball skills," is, at best, a vague intention. It's not a goal. A goal must be clearly defined, not just a simple slogan, and it must include measurable, objective indicators to track your progress. For example, you could set a goal like, in 30 days, I want to achieve an 80% success rate in 100 passing attempts. Without a specific goal, you might unconsciously avoid challenges and fail to make meaningful progress. Second, practice must focus on learning. When you start learning something new, you're not just building new neural models in your brain, you're also connecting these new models to existing ones scattered throughout your brain. In other words, you're not only downloading a new piece of the knowledge puzzle, but also integrating it into your existing framework. If you lose focus during this process, the puzzle piece might not fit securely, leaving your understanding incomplete. So, if you're checking messages, chatting with others, or idly procrastinating during practice, you risk making your efforts ineffective. Third, practice must include feedback. Feedback doesn't just tell us how we're doing, also keeps us motivated during practice. I remember watching a documentary about AlphaGo where a defeated Go player mentioned something interesting. He said the scariest part of playing against AI is the lack of feedback. When playing against a human, you can gauge their emotions. If your opponent looks tense after your move, you might think you've played a good move. If they appear smug or confident, you might suspect you've made a mistake, prompting you to concentrate harder. With AI, it's entirely different. You make a move, but there's no emotional feedback. At first, you might feel confident it's a great move. But over time, doubt creeps in. Was it really that good? Maybe not. Maybe it was awful. This lack of feedback often leads to emotional breakdowns during prolonged matches against AI. Humans rely on feedback to maintain emotional drive. The more frequently we receive feedback, the more likely we are to persist in our practice. This is why many people find themselves addicted to fitness. It provides constant, tangible feedback. However, feedback must be effective. Repeating tasks you've already mastered won't lead to improvement. Instead, feedback must align with your specific goals. Take the basketball example again. Let's say your goal is to achieve an 80% success rate in passing 100 balls within 30 days. During practice, simply dribbling the ball by yourself won't help. You need to practice passing with a partner or coach, track your progress, and adjust your approach as needed. This kind of targeted feedback is effective. While this is just an example, the same principle applies to other skills. Structured feedback is key. And in many fields, you don't necessarily need a coach. You can design targeted practice sessions and self-assess your progress. However, effective feedback often targets our weak spots, which can make practice uncomfortable. This leads us to the fourth requirement: stepping out of your comfort zone. Everyone knows the importance of leaving their comfort zone and entering the stretch zone for practice. But where exactly is the boundary between the two? In the book Flow, Millie Csikszentmihalyi introduces the concept of the flow channel. Picture a graph where the horizontal axis represents your skill level, and the vertical axis represents the difficulty of the challenge. Regardless of your current skill level, if the challenge is too difficult, you'll feel anxious and defeated. If it's too easy, you'll feel bored and disengaged. Modern online gaming systems are built around this concept. They aim to match players with opponents of similar skill levels, not too strong to discourage them, nor too weak to make the game uninteresting. This keeps players within their flow channel, so they can enjoy the game and keep playing for longer. Returning to the basketball example, once you've identified a weak spot through feedback, you need to quantify it. Let's say you can only successfully pass 10 out of 100 balls at the start. Set an initial target. Within 5 days, aim to pass 40 out of 100 balls successfully. If this feels too stressful during practice, adjust the goal downward. If it feels too easy or boring, increase the target. The key is to find a balance between difficulty and ability. When you hit this balance, practice becomes highly enjoyable. That's the flow channel. Goals should never be rigid. They need to adjust dynamically based on your individual progress. The more we design learning mechanisms to feel like a game, the more effective our practice will be. So, these are the essential requirements for effective practice: having a clearly defined goal, maintaining focus during practice, incorporating regular feedback, and constantly stepping out of your comfort zone. Now, there's one big question. What happens to our body and brain during deliberate practice? Let's take a closer look at how this type of practice brings about changes. Physical changes are often obvious. For instance, if you practice fitness, you're likely to become stronger. But changes in the brain are harder to observe, which leads many to mistakenly believe that the brain structure is fixed. This belief forms the foundation for many proponents of innate talent, who argue that your success depends entirely on your brain's natural abilities. But is this really the case? With modern MRI technology, we can now study the brain structure in detail. Researchers have found that the connections between neurons in the brain are strengthened or weakened depending on how they're used. In some areas of the brain, new neurons can even grow, yes, even in adults. The brain has an incredible capacity to adapt. One of the most fascinating examples comes from a study by University College London on London taxi drivers. London is often considered the world's most complex city in terms of road systems. Even GPS systems can struggle there. If you're unfamiliar with London's roads and try driving for a service like Uber, success is highly unlikely. That's why London taxi drivers have developed an extraordinary ability to navigate entirely by memory. Researchers conducted MRIs on these taxi drivers and found that the posterior part of their hippocampus, the brain's memory center, was significantly larger than that of the average person. Moreover, the longer a taxi driver had been working, the larger this part of their brain became, giving them an advantage in navigating London's labyrinthine streets. Interestingly, this effect wasn't observed in London bus drivers, whose routes are fixed and therefore don't challenge their memory in the same way. Furthermore, when these taxi drivers retired, their hippocampus gradually returned to a more ordinary size. This demonstrates that the brain's structure and function are not fixed like electronic components, but instead adapt based on how they're used. Think back to when we were kids, and our parents often reminded us to maintain good habits, like keeping a proper distance from our books or not staring at screens for too long. But few people teach us to develop good habits for using our brains. This is largely because changes in the brain are less visible, so we often overlook their importance. As a result, poor mental habits leave our brains disorganized and randomly shaped, affecting our ability to perform at critical moments. Similarly, if we stop engaging in deliberate practice, the progress we've made can vanish, and our brains will revert to their original state. So, deliberate practice helps shape our brains in positive ways. But once we've done this, how does it change the way we think? How do our perspectives and problem-solving approaches differ from those of the average person? This, I believe, is the most important part. Now, let's explore the ultimate goal of deliberate practice: systematic thinking. The original term used in the book is mental representations, but I think the author's explanation is somewhat unclear, so I'll share my own perspective. What is systematic thinking? Let me give you an example. Imagine looking at a chessboard. To most of us, it's just a collection of pieces with no particular meaning. But to a professional chess player, each position hints at various possibilities, allowing them to quickly calculate potential moves and predict their opponent's actions. A grandmaster can store tens of thousands of data chunks or even more in their memory. These chunks are logically organized and categorized, much like the structure of a large company. Through years of training, they've developed the ability to retrieve and apply these chunks quickly and efficiently. What seems like abstract information to an outsider might, to a professional, signal a significant opportunity or challenge. In essence, systematic thinking is the process of integrating a large body of knowledge from a specific field into your long-term memory and training yourself to retrieve and apply this knowledge efficiently. When faced with a problem in that field, you can quickly activate relevant information and address the issue. The more data chunks a professional has, the more logically organized and efficiently retrievable they are, and the more likely they are to outperform their competitors. This systematic approach is why professionals often appear superhuman or even genius-like in their fields. However, outside their area of expertise, their performance is no different from that of an average person. In fact, the author conducted an experiment where chess pieces were ranged randomly on a board in positions that would never occur in a real game. Under these conditions, professional chess players' memory performance was no better than that of ordinary people. Systematic thinking enables us to continually improve in a specific field. Beyond helping us excel at work or study, it offers additional advantages. For instance, systematic thinking helps us identify patterns and predict the future. With this mindset, we move beyond isolated, one-sided views, and begin to see the world through a lens of interconnectedness and growth. Take Ray Dalio, for example. He's a master of systematic thinking. His ability to synthesize vast amounts of information into a cohesive framework allows him to predict trends and navigate complex challenges with remarkable precision. In his second book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Ray Dalio identifies 18 key factors that influence debt cycles and global dynamics. Drawing on 500 years of global development, he argues that the rise and fall of nations follow a typical long cycle model with 3 stages: rise, peak, and decline. Each stage is marked by these 18 factors, which serve as signals for their beginning and end. These factors include debt levels, domestic and international order, cost, competitiveness, military strength, and the status of currency. Dalio believes that by systematically analyzing the current state using these 18 factors, we can gain a clearer understanding of societal and national development and make better decisions. Of course, Dalio's model is far more complex, with so many parameters that it requires computer algorithms to process and make decisions. This is where systematic thinking comes in. It enabled Dalio to make the right investment decisions, turning Bridgewater Associates into the largest hedge fund in the world. On the flip side, without a systematic way of thinking, people are left relying on extremely limited, immediate information to make decisions. In today's age of fragmented information, many individuals no longer aim to deeply understand a field. Instead, they go online and look for quick answers, often relying on a 100-word post or a 3-minute summary. The focus isn't on the reasoning behind the conclusion, but merely on the conclusion itself. Without a solid knowledge framework, it's easy to fall for shallow theories and believe we're thinking critically when, in reality, we're not. Without a systematic approach, it's nearly impossible to identify patterns and predict the future. Every component of systematic thinking deserves deeper exploration, and we'll dive into each of them in future videos. The second major advantage of systematic thinking is the ability to make intuitive decisions when necessary. What does that mean? In Thinking, Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman shares a fascinating example. A team of firefighters entered a house to extinguish a fire. As they sprayed water in the kitchen, their commander suddenly shouted, "Everyone out now." The team evacuated immediately, and just as they exited, the kitchen floor collapsed. The commander later admitted he didn't know why he had given that order. Reflecting on the incident, he recalled that the fire wasn't particularly intense, but his ears felt unusually hot, a subtle sign that something was wrong. It turned out the fire's source wasn't in the kitchen, but in the basement beneath their feet. This story illustrates that after extensive deliberate practice in a particular field, we can develop highly refined intuition. This kind of intuition allows us to make critical, unconscious decisions when needed. We'll explore this concept further in our discussion of thinking, fast and slow. The third advantage of systematic thinking is its ability to enhance learning efficiency. Once you've established a systematic understanding of a field, acquiring additional knowledge in that domain becomes significantly easier. New information can be effortlessly integrated into your existing framework, creating a Matthew effect. The more you learn, the stronger you become, and the higher the quality and efficiency of future learning. In our video on the neuroscience of exams, we discussed how mastering one field's knowledge enables the brain to transfer learning to other fields. This phenomenon shows that systematic thinking and deliberate practice work like the two wheels of a car or the two wings of a bird, complementary and inseparable. Through effective practice and the establishment of systematic thinking, combined with continuous repetition, we can accomplish feats that seem impossible to most people. The author of Deliberate Practice conducted a study on violin students, analyzing the hours they spent practicing before the age of 18. Students with average performance had practiced around 3,420 hours, while excellent students averaged 5,300 hours. The most outstanding students? They had practiced 7,400 hours. While many believe music is heavily dependent on talent, it's unlikely that someone who has practiced thousands of hours less will outperform their peers. Even if some natural differences exist, they cannot make up for thousands of hours of effective practice. The difference between people often comes down to whether they've engaged in effective practice and developed systematic thinking. Success is multifaceted, and factors like family and societal background, which we may have little control over, certainly play a role. But deliberate practice is something within our control, making it perhaps the best option available to us. Most of the world's achievements don't require innate talent, they require consistent, deliberate effort. On this point, I can personally relate. In middle school, I couldn't even dribble a basketball properly and would frequently lose possession. But through relentless practice, I eventually became the captain of my high school team. My view of personal ability underwent a complete transformation during that time. Some of my high school friends would say I was naturally gifted at basketball, and I would just laugh. They never saw me in middle school, where teachers and classmates had already written me off, saying, "Woody will never be good at basketball." The biggest takeaway from deliberate practice for me is to never set limits for yourself. Returning to the story from the beginning, can an ordinary person train themselves to memorize 82 digits at once? I believe it's possible. Can you master any skill you want through deliberate practice? I believe that's possible too. Thank you for reading this book with me. We've added another milestone to our reading journey. I'm Pink Woody, new YouTuber passionate about sharing knowledge. Let's read 30 great books together this year. See you in the next video.